Top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
All right. My name is Tom Dutta. I am the host of the Quiet Warrior Show. I think I sounded like Matthew McConaughey there for a minute. Thank you, Matthew, boring that. We're here today, and I have something very special. We are recording, never been seen before on the Quiet Warrior Show. We're live streaming a 3-part mini-series, and I'll be introducing my guest in just a moment. But what is live streaming, everybody? Well, live streaming is interrupting the airways. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And well, you've already found me, but if you don't know where to find this and you want to tell other folks, just find my YouTube channel and you can subscribe to it at the video at the bottom, or on LinkedIn or Facebook if you're connected to me, and we're there live. Now we'll be turning this into a YouTube premiere video, a series of 3, as well as an international podcast to honor our guests. Amazing story. And so I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about my guest, bring him on, and then we'll roll from there. We will be cutting tape and creating 3 episodes on this in this one session. So stand by, everybody. It's going to be fun. All right. Well, I asked my guest, his name is Bob Krulish. He'll be on in a moment. As I said, you'll see him. I asked him to send me an email after I had read a book he'd written. I said, tell me your story and why you think it fits. And this is part of the email, everybody. He says, hi, Tom, exclamation mark. Already he's a guy with energy. My journey is one of a hero's journey. I was successful. I had a beautiful family, career, and wealth. The only problem was I was undiagnosed and untreated bipolar disorder. Eventually, my mania took all of that away from me. I found myself sleeping on the floor in an abandoned cabin in the woods, alone and penniless. I cursed everything, especially God, for giving me so much pain and anguish, for giving me so much loss. I was in so much pain that I, one desperate day, found myself nearly dying from suicide. And then it gets worse. It goes into the second part of his story, and then finally the redemption. Everybody, what has he done with this life? Is he still there? Well, yes. I'm going to bring him on the screen. Bob Krulish, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show.
Oh, pleasure to be here. Thank you, Tom.
All right, Bob. Well, listen, I said to you that this deeply touched my heart. We've told everybody a bit about you. Everybody scrolling across the screen. Now, if you're watching the future video, you'll see that. Otherwise, at the end of the podcast, we'll let you know where to get a hold of Bob and all of his work. Hey, Bob, I'm going to just say that it was amazing meeting you. And you know how that happened is we're fellow authors, and I happened to get your book and I read it. And I got to tell you, man, that from cover to cover, I read it yesterday and I just couldn't put it down. I wrote 4 pages of notes, and there's very few books that touch me deeply in my soul, but this one did, especially because of this story. So
thank you, Tom.
Yeah, so welcome. You're over in Seattle, right?
I am in Seattle, the east side of Seattle. Yep.
Yeah, fantastic. And as we were saying offline, up here, I'm up here in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. So just a stone's throw away. It's a
Yeah.
beautiful sunny day. So before we get into the story, I just want to acknowledge your co-author of the book you wrote. The book, everybody, that we're talking about is called When Screams Become Whispers. That's what caught my attention. And the co-author is Ali Anderson, who also lives with bipolar disorder. So I want to acknowledge that right up front. The first part of the series we're calling Mischievous, Bob, and that's a clue. And so, Bob, look, one of the things I read at the beginning on chapter 1, page 4, it was a PDF manuscript you sent me. You wrote this: to all those who struggle and all those who care for them, never give up, never give up. So take us back into your story, man. I'm going to give you something to lead you off. You wrote, fights don't always end that way, but it happened enough that my stomach flips when the volume rises sharply. Take us back into that part of your life. I think you were referencing being at home as a child.
Yeah, there was a lot of difficulty growing up. I did not realize until much later that my dad had pretty much untreated bipolar disorder himself, and so there was a lot of noise. There was a lot of struggle, a lot of when you were in trouble, you were going to get, you were probably going to get beat up by him, and it was going to, always be bad. Eventually, he got to the point where he left us when I just had turned about 16 years old, and ran away with another woman that he had been seeing for quite a while. We understood, and we never heard from him again. I think it was his way of just having to deal with the mess he made in life, and I think he was looking for a fresh start, and his bipolar just took him to a really terrible place.
Thank you for sharing that. First of all, Bob, I want to honor that, bringing that story. First of all, writing a book about your life, and that part of it is being very vulnerable. I mean, there's risks to that, talking about yourself. And so, man, I want to honor that. I want to get you to pause for a moment so that I can jump in. Here's what happened when I started reading this. I might have said this to you before we came on live, that parts of this were like reading my own life story. And I'm out there with my story, but I'll tell you, there's a lot of things in here that I've never talked about. So I want to just riff on this for a moment with you. I had a flashback to my childhood. I read when you were talking about your dad left. First of all, I want to go back to that comment about stomach flips. I think what you're getting at there is when we grow up as children in households where there's screaming and yelling and violence. And I always used to say to my mom later in life when I got older that, Mom, words matter. And my mom would say things like, oh, the boys aren't listening. But no, it gets wired deeply into subconscious. Yes. And so is that what you were saying there, that when people around you raise their voices, you just sort of be flipped inside your gut?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I just had a high level of sensitivity for anybody that even appeared to be upset. You know, in it. I struggled almost my whole life with that.
Yeah. Then that was so those are one of the threads. My brain was going on a journey here. And when you said that, Bob, since I was a kid, because my home was full of anger and violence, and I want to keep the spotlight on your story, but there's parallels. And I'll say that when an author writes a book like you, if one person reads it and it triggers something that can make them take a different path, man, you're a hero in my mind. And
thank you.
Yeah, and so this thing about that, I didn't figure that out about myself until I was late in my age. In fact, at age 31 was my first executive role, and I used to melt into an emotional puddle when anybody elevated their voices. And then in my life, I found myself surrounded by circumstances in my marriage, raising kids who sometimes, had anger. I was a stepfather, and I didn't realize that. And even today, Bob, I can't. Even when my wife and I are having conversations, and I've been married 25 years to my amazing Anna, I get my gut gets into a knot, or if I'm on a phone call and that, or somebody's raising or elevating, I just find it hard to deal with. So I want to thank you for bringing that to the forefront, explaining it. The other one I saw in your book was about your dad driving a Lincoln. Hey man, my dad's was an old Cadillac, and your dad, I wrote down this on my paper. The Lincoln drove off and we were relieved. It was over for now. It appeared that as your dad left the house, I think somewhere in the book, and I'll give it back to you in a minute. I'm just bringing this all together for you to talk about more. There was some thought that maybe he was in the CIA because he disappeared. When my dad disappeared, he was going to the bars to drink with others, and he was always disappearing. And you mentioned about an affair, and I read the name Maureen in the book. Well, our household name was Annabelle. My father had affairs, and I came home from school one day and my mom had a towel wrapped around her head and she was on the phone. And this young girl called and said, Mr. Dutta comes to see my mom and I don't like it. And that's how I found out. And my dad never hid those indiscretions. I started reading this further, man. And it's like every time I saw a little thread in your story, I went, that's my story, dude. And then I went, that's a story of millions and millions of children around the world.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So I want to dig back in and give it to you now on this point that you wrote, your dad at times called you names. His love came at a cost. There was a need to have high grades. You were the chosen one. He would use you to brag around the water cooler. Talk about a little bit about that and in terms of how that shaped you at this stage of your life, Bob.
Yeah, that was a very stressful part of my life where I was, I was named after him. I was a junior. I was the oldest one. I was, like I said, the chosen one. I was really held to a high standard of performance, especially in school. It became an obsession for me to get great grades. Getting an A wasn't enough. Getting 100% on an exam was right. I get 95% on an exam and I'd be miserable. And so there was this need for perfection, for really trying to get his attention, to vie for his attention all the time. And that came at the cost of my brother and my sister. They didn't really get a lot of attention from him because he gave me most of his attention when he was giving any of his kids any attention at all.
Yeah, again, let me jump in there. Thanks for deep diving on that, Bob. This is something that in the work I do as now as a coach with others, my background is, as you know, from my work as being business, leading people and companies. I kind of fell into that just by chance. But when I used to bring home my book reports, they used to have A++ on them sometimes. And I didn't realize till later when I started looking into this that, I said this in a TED Talk I just did recently, that I was a self-worth chaser, not a success chaser. And I was really chasing something else. So I'm reading your book, it reminded me of that same thing, that the time I got attention from my dad when he wasn't, drunk and violent was really when I was overachieving.
Right.
And my brain at a young age, because you don't use your rational brain, I guess, until you're in your 15 or 20. You just don't have use of that. My brain didn't know the difference.
Right.
And it was wired deeply in me. And so when I read that in your story, there was another piece that jumped out at me. I just want to bring this so we can get people into the actual story and feel this. You said about college, I think you moved to Florida, but in college, man, you were somebody who was really driven. Fighter pilot training school, student senator. I mean, it looked like on the outside, this incredible, smart, talented guy who had all this stuff going for him.
Right.
But somehow these wolves or monsters in your head, what was going on at that point, I guess people on the outside thought could see you as mischievous. But
yes.
Not necessarily understanding there was something else going on. There was this one dinner at Donna's. There was a toast from the family. Can you just talk about that? Because something happened at the dinner table that, and you first, I think they were toasting you and honoring you, and you just had to say something about being on the dean's list. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I did a lot of bragging. It was like you said about self-worth. I never really felt like I measured up to my dad, and then I didn't feel like I measured up to others. So any chance I had to brag, I would brag, and I made up stuff that really wasn't even true. Part of that was my bipolar, where you really get into this grandiose thinking. And a lot of it was to just be, accepted by people and to be awed by people. So I went into, what is a pilot program, training program in college, and I made it out to be that I was going to be, this gigantic, awesome jet fighter pilot. Nobody had told me I was going to be a fighter pilot. And then when I became a student senator, I started telling everybody I was going to become a U.S. senator. I was going to be the youngest U.S. senator ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, talk about an ego, man.
Yeah, I had a
And
gigantic, grandiose, egotistical mindset that
yeah,
nothing was, and a lot of it was to try. I thought I could draw my dad back out, like he was a golfer. He taught me how to golf. So I became like a pro at a golf course. I mean, I everything I did was extreme, and I was just hoping that he'd,
yeah,
respond like,
yeah,
oh my gosh, my son is so
yeah,
amazing. I gotta get back in touch with him.
yeah. Well, this is interesting because I want people who are watching this. That was a teaching moment, everybody, from Bob there, that you were really in search of, I think what I heard, the love of your father, or getting him back, his attention back. And would it be fair to say that sometimes children who lose their fathers this way, they just disappear, that maybe because of their age, if they're young, they blame themselves. They feel
Absolutely.
now, I didn't tell you this before the show, but the way my dad left me was, first of all, the affair happened, but he wrote a 7-page letter. I still can see it vividly, Bob, on 8.5 by 11 line paper in black Sharpie. And each one of us got a letter, me and my two brothers, and our names were on the front of the envelope. He gave us that, and it was left for us, and he was gone. And I now, when I read through your story, I started reliving that. It was painful, but I also learned a lot from you. That part of me said, you know what, bless Bob, because there's somebody out there who was like me. When I tried to explain that part of my life, even decades through my life, to people,
Yeah.
they just look at me as somebody who's messed up, who's just whining. But finally, I meet you and I read your book, and I'm honored to have him on this conversation live. And I'm going like, wait a minute. His dad left him. He thought he went to the CIA. He had an affair, and
Right.
he was impacted by it, similar to me. I'm not making this up. And
Right.
so let's talk about a couple other things in there. All of a sudden, you've got, like you said, first of all, it's pretty cool when you said about the student in school, the student senator. Hey, man, I'd vote for you. Krulish sounds like a senator's name anyway.
Yeah.
But isn't
Yeah.
that is a big part of it, bragging about yourself and whatnot. I can relate to that. By the way, this is falling on my own sword, but when I tried out to do my TED Talk a few years ago, I failed. People don't know this, but I tried 3 times and I finally got it. Yeah, last year I did it. But when they first saw me, my coach after, because I hired a coach, I said, just tell me. She said, well, in the first few minutes, people didn't really like you. And I was just floored me. It was like a punch in the gut. And she said, well, you're not real. You're just trying to be something you're not. And I was talking about my book and my business and all that, and what I realized. And then now, through finding my faith through God, that, like I saw you wrote there, Bob, that it's really about others. And and when you love yourself, from what you've taught me in the book, is you have to wake up, right, and love yourself. You don't need to brag. Something happened at school that led to some unfortunate events. Tell us about that.
Well, I got so involved in the student government. I got so involved in being a jet fighter pilot and student government and trying to attract people into my life. And and this need to be great that I quit going to class. And here later on, I get a degree in mathematics some 10 years later. So that's how smart I am about math, but I'm flunking everything. I'm failing every course because I'm not even showing up anymore. I'm too busy running for senator.
All right. I got to jump in there and have some fun with you. I love you, Bob, and your story, so you know I'm having fun with you.
Okay.
I mean, somebody when I was reading your book, I was saying, what do you pretend not to know, dumbass? You're not in class, so how do you expect to be great? Getting them to keep it. And everybody, I'm not going to give away all the details, but you were literally kicked out of school.
I was kicked out.
And I remember when I was reading how you were speaking about that, it was like you didn't get it. You're trying to convince the school that, hey, I was trying to be the best training pilot in the student government and all this. And
yeah,
they also called you something, answer key. Tell me about that.
Answer key. Yeah, I got that nickname because I would, when I did well in school, in both high school and in college later on in life, I would make 100% on every test, especially in math.
Yeah.
And so I got this notion that I would just put as my name answer key, and I would be doing the professor a favor. You don't have to make an answer key. I'm giving it to you.
That's hilarious.
I got to be known as answer key.
Yeah, well, you know what a great nickname to have. I mean, that's a compliment. If anybody has that kind of wisdom, that's amazing. But I do. It appears that you were gifted in one way, that you had a high level of intelligence, and that played out right in your career. So let me just jump back in here. So here we are, everybody, and there's, Bob grew up. He went through this journey. Very difficult at home with an angry father, and then his dad just disappeared, and that led him through to focus on achieving and trying to prove his own greatness. And then here you are in it was college, right, where you're kicked out of school. You move off campus, and there was somebody named Donna in your life. I think I read somewhere that you faked it with her, and you. Tell me about this weight you had on your shoulder about letting your mom down when those things happen.
Yeah, well, there was a lot on my shoulders. I trying to date somebody like Donna, whose dad was a very accomplished life insurance executive, and they lived in a very fancy big house in Sarasota, Florida. And they had all the trappings of wealth. He couldn't have been a nicer guy, her dad. And I just yearned to have that kind of dad in my life. And so I was always trying to impress them, I even went into life insurance sales to impress her dad at one time. And I was trying to help my mom the best I could because she was a stay-at-home mom. She did not have a career when my dad left. And I found myself at 16 years old bagging groceries at a supermarket, and handing my check over to my mom every week. And when I didn't, get through college, it was a real disappointment. You can tell I let her down. She was hoping for something much bigger from me. And at the time, she was the only person that really was there in my life for who I was, not who I pretended to be.
Yeah. And I think that's just a gift from all mothers. Thank you. I would say your mother's the unsung hero and under the narrative of your life. And we just passed Mother's Day. That timestamps this show, so we can honor your mom. Wanted to just say something about that this weight you described having on your shoulder about having to let your mom down. Everybody, this is a teaching moment. How many of us, when we're children, we get older, do we feel when we haven't achieved that we're letting somebody down? And that is a huge amount of pressure mentally as well. And yet, if raise our children with, I have children, Bob, to know that they're great, and it doesn't matter what their grades are. Of course it matters
It
to
doesn't,
try to
right?
do well, but we don't define them by the A++ or the size of the job or the paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
They're
Right.
starting to say now in the work I've been doing, and I went through cognitive behavioral therapy for my concussion. I slipped into depression over the
Oh,
last couple of years
wow.
from my accident I told you about. That
Yeah.
they're saying now that they're starting to reshape the way we teach children, that they're teaching parents to not say, don't do that, but to separate behavior from the child, to say things
Yes.
like, first of all, Bob, Dad loves you. The C- on the paper, I don't quite like that. Perhaps there's something you can do, or what could you do to make that better? It might open
Mm-hmm.
better
Mm-hmm.
opportunities later. So separate the two, because at a young age, kids can't understand the difference between I don't like you. I don't like the C-. They equate that to I don't love you. I don't like you. You're
Right.
bad.
Right.
Amazing. Hey, Bob, I'm
Right.
just gonna roll this forward because we're getting to the end of time here. That the right hand turn that I saw in the story at this point was you kicked out of school, but then you enrolled in the Army. Just tell us about that. And something happened to your knee, and then
Oh
it
my
all
gosh.
changed
Yeah.
again. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was out of just pure desperation. They were going to give me $2,000 towards college, and for $2,000, I basically signed myself up for 6 years of Army Reserves and the full gamut of basic training and being trained for my job. And there was a point in time when I was having some knee problems before. When I was in high school, I used to do the stadium, run up and down the stadium to get in shape for my golf. And I kind of blew out my knee. And now I'm running around, in full fatigue uniform and carrying a rifle. And we're running, miles and miles and miles. And my knee just kind of blows out. But the drill sergeant doesn't want to have anything to do with it, thinks I'm just making crap up, and doesn't come over to look at my knee. But instead, what he does is he makes the entire platoon do about 100 push-ups and made me watch them. He said, we're going to have everybody but Krulish do 100 push-ups because he's whining about his knee. And that, when he finally got around to looking at my knee, he sent me right away to the hospital, which is where I got treated. So it was a very difficult thing for me, because I was just I was so at a loss for a dad figure, that I was actually drawn into the Army, again, trying to impress. I scored the highest that you can score on what's called the ASVAB test, which is how they place you in the Army. And they put me into where I was doing cryptography. I was actually breaking code because I had this mathematical mind. So it taught me that I had this special skill, but it was it just was an awful experience. And for $2,000, I'm not even sure I ever got the $2,000 either.
Hey, getting in the Army and the $2,000 paycheck can attract anybody. We're getting to the end of time, but I want to wrap up just with a couple of comments on that. Bob, thanks for sharing that part of the story, everyone. If you've just joined us, we're talking about living with bipolar, a 3-part series. This is part 1. And, part 1 is Mischievous Bob. And Bob's written a book called When Screams Become Whispers. More on that later. But, here he is at this stage and kicked out of school. I mean, this is a guy who's getting A+, top grades. He's looks like he's on his way to become a senator in the school. He's a student government. And all of a sudden, it almost appears like you're tearing down your own success one after another. You're getting it and you're gone. Your father left you and you're still seeking and searching for something. And underneath all that, there's a hidden thread, which we haven't talked about yet, which will be coming up. Leave it with this, that at the end of this part of the story, Bob, wrote down that you return back into society a better version of yourself. In other words, after the knee injury in the Army and off the heels of Vietnam, I think there wasn't any fighting to do. So you came back into society. Like most of us, coming back into the world and feeling, I'm a better version of myself. I think things are good. So we're going to leave it at that, Bob. We're going to be coming back again with you. Would you come back for part 2 of the series?
Yes.
Alrighty, buddy. We're going to do part 2 of the series. It's going to be called Manic Bob, The Dark Night of the Soul. And again, you'll find it here on the Quiet Warrior Show. You'll find it on the YouTube channel, the second part of that series. So find your true passion and purpose like Bob has. Live life that you deserve and desire. And find this show and give it a high rating. And we'll see you back for part 2 very soon. All right, Bob, stand by. Okay, we're still live. We're rolling live on tape, so feel free to be goofy or anything. That doesn't matter anymore. I'm
Okay.
what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the banner, Bob, while we're speaking. And
All
to
right.
those who are still seeing this live, we're doing a 3-part series. We're recording live. We're in the transition from part 1 to 2. So this will be just changing the banner that's going to scroll on the back of the screen there. And okay, Bob, so there it is, part 2 of 3. We've got that set.
Yep.
And all right, so what I'm going to do is instead of playing the intro, outro music and taking 2 minutes of time, I'm just going to edit that in later. So I'll just count down. So I want you to just stand by there, Bob.
Okay, great.
All right. Okay, just be silent. All right. In 3, 2, 1. Well, welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. My name is Tom Dutta, and we're back again with part 2 of an epic series, a 3-part series. And well, this is a live stream, and we're live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn. And what is live streaming? We're interrupting the airwaves and letting people watch in the studio as we're taping. It's the next generation of broadcasting. You'll be able to find this production on the Quiet Warrior Show, so subscribe to that wherever you get your podcasts. As well, you'll see on the screen a button, subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's where we'll be putting out the YouTube video premiere of this when we're finished the 3-part series. So it's a pleasure now to call back into my studio, Mr. Bob Krulish. Hey, Bob, welcome back.
Good to be back. Thank you, Tom.
Well, those who didn't see or hear part 1, you'll want to go back and get the first part of the story. But Bob, we're going to dive right back in. And I'm calling this the Manic Bob, the Dark Night of the Soul. And for those who know what that is in the hero's journey, which is a narrative by Joseph Campbell, that's really a big part of my show. In the last episode, we talked about Mischievous Bob, a man who's being called the answer key, who has a gifted level of knowledge and intelligence, who grew up and had a bit of a troubled childhood with a father who left. He went out into the world trying to prove something, and he excelled at so many things. And he was given honors, student government, and was fighter pilot training and grooming to be the next senator. But there was something missing along the way, Bob. You stumbled and things kind of disappeared one step at a time. And then finally you enrolled in the Army, where you were looking for something, a father figure, you called it. And well, that ended, and now you're back into society. So we'll begin the story in the part I call, just looking at my notes here, that California. There was a move to California, and then your mom began working at a firm, a stock brokerage firm. Why don't you start there? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, she started working at the stock brokerage firm. I was still trying to discover who I was and who I was going to be. And I had not gone back to college yet. I was just kind of in between, and I was really struggling to figure out, what I can do to earn a living and to, have some meaning in my life. And fortunately, the person she worked for at that stock brokerage firm was nice enough to interview me and offer me a job as a stockbroker, even though I hadn't completed college. And I was really excited about that. the challenge though was that I had this self-esteem issue, or I had this abandonment issues from my dad. And being a stockbroker, as you might know, Tom, is just all about making cold calls when you're beginning. And so I was getting rejected left and right. And eventually it just got to be too psychologically difficult for me. I didn't really understand all those dynamics at the time. Then I understand them now. And it just caused me all kinds of problems psychologically. And I eventually I was fired because I could not get the work done.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bob. Again, everybody, I want to bring to the forefront, Bob wrote a book called, Bob, tell us the title of the book. Do you have it with you there, the physical book by any
Yeah,
chance?
I do.
Just
Yeah.
hold it up.
Yeah,
Let's get
you
it.
bet.
Yeah, I'm going to full screen. You just hold it up there. I'm going to put you back on full screen. For
Okay.
those watching the video, you'll see it. For those listening, you certainly can get the title. Bob, read the title out.
Yeah, when screams become whispers, one man's inspiring victory over bipolar disorder.
That's awesome. And so thanks, Bob. We'll find out later how to get that book. But going back to the story, everybody, the story unfolds. You heard in the first chapter, sort of Bob from his childhood up till now. And the reason why I wanted to start here was, man, when I read your book, Bob, and that's how we met, there's threads in every part of that book where I'm looking squarely down a shotgun at my own life going, that's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
So this thing about being hired, how old were you as a stockbroker when you started there?
I was only about 23 or 24 years old.
Wow. Well, that's first of all to get to Wall Street and to get into that. And as we talked about last time, the high achiever thing, unless you're getting A pluses or exceptional results, you felt, as you said, like somewhat of a failure. But right. I would say, most would say less than 1% of people make it to Wall Street, man. So it's like, dude, what are you pretending not to know? That was a hell of a feat. But the thing that people might not know about you if they didn't listen to the first episode, by the way, everybody go back and hear the first chapter of the story, is they called you the answer key. So you had this incredible intelligence. And I think you mentioned that you didn't have the background, but some of the guys getting into that firm had masters or something. So
sure. They had degrees in finance and whatnot.
Yeah. And you didn't, but you had this way about you where you were able to believe in working hard and your aptitude. And Dan, I think that was his name, your boss, he said, write the exam, level 7 exam. And dude, you passed it, which is incredible. If anybody knows about brokerage, my background is financial services, spent time in banks and sold mutual funds and things. Right. These aren't easy things to do. And so there you were, and you excelled, and you passed that. And I want to read something that I wrote down here. It says on a cold call, I wrote on the cold call, there was somebody who was elevating and yelling at you, insulting you. And you wrote that I felt shame, anxiety, and I couldn't pick up again. I want to draw a parallel, not the same situation, but we went through a financial challenge in our life, mid 2000s. It's in my book. And I got pulled into a direct selling company. The owners were in the United States, and they wanted me as a Canadian businessman, to help open it in our market. I didn't know anything about direct selling, but man, the one thing I had to do is get on a phone and dial numbers and talk to people. And here's what happened, Bob.
Yeah, how did that go?
Well, I want to keep the spotlight on you, but I want to say this for a reason, because I related to it, that to get to what's called a diamond level, that's the top level of being a distributor, is less than 5%, 2% of people do it. I became a diamond. I actually became a diamond with no experience in direct selling. But after a short period of time, I started feeling this rejection. The calls people were rejecting me. Others who were in my team were coming on the phone, and 3-way calls, they called it. And I remember one day calling my upline, they called them distributor, a fellow who made a lot of money in the industry. I said, I don't know what it is, but I just can't pick up the phone. And I've been in sales all my life, Bob. In fact, as an exec, background has been sales too. And it was, when I read your book, it was that thread. It was that in my home growing up, there was yelling and screaming. There was all sorts of anger. There was a lot of rejection. And my subconscious mind had this story and this paralysis I would feel getting on a call when it wasn't positive. And I just couldn't face it. So let's get back into this. Some cocaine. Tell us about that. Most, most people know Wall Street has some white powder. You got involved in that a little bit, right?
I got involved in the white powder, and I found it to be, all good. I found it to be made it easier for me to make calls, made it easier for me to feel better about myself, um, and it became something I was addicted to. The thing that I didn't know at the time, and I don't discover for a long time, is this whole idea about bipolar disorder. And so I'm not realizing that I'm also treating bipolar disorder with this cocaine, and that I'm not only treating this ability to make phone calls, but I'm also going through these episodes, these bipolar episodes, and my mind is just racing with all kinds of destructive thoughts and pain and anguish, from my childhood, and I'm just trying to shut it up. I'm really Pink Floyd's got its great song called "Comfortably Numb," and that's what I found myself doing, was getting comfortably numb.
Wow, that's amazing. I remember just now flashing back to watching the movie Wall Street, one of my favorites, and so many other films. There's one with McConaughey in it, and looking at these guys and having grown up and known some of the people who worked on Wall Street. Now you've got me thinking again about, many of them are caught up in sex and drugs,
Right.
porn and all these things. But, we find that behind that is mental illness. Behind
Yes.
that is a hidden, I call them wolves or monsters, these voices, these things we're trying to calm. I want to thank you for being vulnerable and talking about that. So here we are in this story, and you're at this brokerage firm. I mean, you gave us the outcome. You were let go. Sales, you couldn't get your sales to the level, and no fault of your own, but there was more going on in your head at that time. And so I want to move forward to, I guess when we talk about this part of the story, I use the word manic Bob,
Mhm.
and something started to appear. Before that, I think you had a bout with Faith. Just to quickly tell us about
Yeah.
that. There was somebody in the firm before you left it, the stock brokerage, a guy named Mark. Tell us about what happened with that.
Yeah, Mark was interesting character. He sat right behind me. You're in a bullpen,
Yeah.
so you're just out there with a whole bunch of other brokers, and all you're doing is cold calling. And Mark would be just so good at this. He would just never put the phone down. He literally never put the phone down. He'd hang up and dial,
Yeah.
never put it down. Mine was always down. I never picked it up. And and he was very good at what he did, and he was a man of faith. And my life was more a man of the world. I was trying to be everything that the world wanted me to be. And so, like you had mentioned, sex and drugs was a big part of my life, and different partners coming to lunch with me. I would have a different gal come and have lunch with me just about every week, if not every other day. And my friend Mark was, at the time, he was more annoying than he was a friend. He would actually tell me how I'm going to hell by the way I live. And I remember saying stuff like, well, it's better than living in hell being married to only one person, like you are.
Oh, I'm sure that went over well.
Like a bomb, like a lead balloon. And we ended up actually going to learn about the brokerage firm on Wall Street, and stayed out in Manhattan together on Wall Street for a month. I had to share a hotel room with him, and I hardly ever saw him, because we would go to work and then I'd go get drunk and party all night.
Yeah.
And he'd be up talking to his wife and reading his scriptures. And I was like, this guy's life just sucks.
All right, let me jump in there, and thanks for your honesty. And I know God's looking down on us now, and He's
Yeah.
shaking His head, but He's realizing there's a saying, and I went through this in my life, that sometimes I believe God strips us, and sometimes we're stripped of more, and at the point we're stripped to having nothing because we need to be taught something. And your life was all about, I wrote down the word here, significance. And, you had to have the biggest paycheck, and the word love wasn't in the equation. And it's funny because, again, I look back in my life, and that was me, 31 when I became a CEO, and I had to have the biggest paycheck, biggest car, always getting accolades. And I was still seeking and searching something. Yeah. So you moved to Utah, and I'll just read this. There was something in the story about life is good. 98% of people are young, they're Mormons, and you became part of that faith. And there was this one line that stood out for me. It says, you got baptized, and a strange feeling, you said, His love was the only thing I needed. I had it now. Nothing to chase, only a path to follow. I love that. And it was at that point of the story, Bob, that I went, okay, now I can get off the edge of my seat. This train wreck of a life. Now there's going to be some sense of calm and peace, and this man's going to be happy. And then it didn't happen. So let's get into the next 8 or 10 minutes of the part of the story I call manic. Yeah. There's one scene in the book where you just lose it on your son, your daughter, your wife. You're waking up in bed sweating with fear. And then you went to see a doctor. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, at first I was just not sure what was going on. We believed that I just had like an anxiety attack, more of a panic attack at that time, but my anger was just severe, and although I never hit my children like I had been hit myself as a child, I was punching holes in the doors and in the walls, screaming and yelling. I remember my daughter telling me that after I did get kicked out, eventually I get kicked out of my home, that she said, "Dad, what we all noticed right away when you weren't there was how quiet it was, how quiet the house is now without you there." And I thought, well, thanks a lot, honey. Thanks for letting me know that. Right back at you. But she was so right. And then when I saw a doctor, this is the interesting thing about bipolar, is that the doctor thought I was having bouts of depression and anxiety, and put me on a medication, an SSRI, an antidepressant.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that if you have bipolar disorder, it's in the medical books that if you take an antidepressant without a mood stabilizer for the bipolar, you'll get manic. And my doctor did not diagnose me as having bipolar. She thought I had, a need for an antidepressant alone. And that antidepressant put me in a manic episode that lasted about 3 years, Tom. Normally an episode lasts about 4 to 5 months.
Wow.
But for as long as I took that antidepressant, I was manic. And there's where some real destruction came.
Well, everybody, we're talking to Bob Krulish. The book we'll mention it again in a moment. It's on the screen. Bob, my heart just grew 3 times, man. That part of the story, and that's what happened when I read that part of the book. That's why I'm calling this part 2 of the interview manic. I just shook my head. I know I'm not suggesting that all doctors make these mistakes, but everybody, you have to take back. This is a teaching moment, your life, and look deeper into everything when you're prescribed medication or something's going on. There's always another answer. Going on an antidepressant, and what you just told me, I wrote that down on my paper. It's funny you're telling me that you could go into this manic state for as long as you're on an antidepressant if you have untreated other issues, bipolar. And we'll get into the bipolar in just a moment. So you're on this medication, and I wrote down here the last bullet. I think it was chapter 17 in the book. And there's a story about a Hummer and these really weird things you started doing, like going shopping for stationery. Tell us about a couple of those things.
Well, you get to say in your mania, you really believe you are, smarter than anybody, more capable than anybody. I jokingly said the only difference between me and God when I'm manic is that God never thought that he was me. But I constantly thought I was godlike, and I behaved like I was. And I was even going to put the word creator on my business card to define who I was.
Wow.
Because I was flipping houses at the time and I was creating deals, even though none of them made any sense and made any money. I felt like I was this supreme kind of a creator person.
Yeah. We'll hold the book up again there, Bob. When screams become whispers. Bob, just gonna jump in there and riff on this. I wrote some notes on that. Everybody, when you get into the book, you got to get the book. I encourage you to get it. Whether you have bipolar or you're around somebody or you're caring for somebody, everybody on the planet should know about what bipolar is. That chapter 17, it's called The Last Bullet. And what you just heard Bob say about putting the word creator on his business card and deals. We don't have time to get into all the nitty gritty, but I'm going to spoil the thunder a little bit here. That you were telling clients to sell a property that was worth $150,000 for $250,000 and trying to convince them that it's going to happen. I mean, I'm reading that. I'm going like, what are you trying to do here? Are you idiot? And here's the thing. This is such a great teaching moment, Bob, that if I met you in that situation, I would not know that you deal with mental illness. I wouldn't know that. Mm-mm. And yet I would think that this guy, that's just what he believes. And maybe you encourage me and maybe I'll do that. But I would blame you if that blew up. I blame you personally for that decision that you had me make. We will learn in the next episode more about why some of those actions weren't yours and why bipolar is such an important topic to understand. So the Hummer thing just got me laughing. I mean, you obviously thought this business wasn't go great. So what you went and bought a Hummer for your wife or something?
No, actually, I'd lost my job at a big insurance firm where I had done some pretty miraculous work because of this manic outbreak. And then some friends were flipping houses and I got into that business. At least I pretended to be in that business. And one of the things was that I wasn't doing well, but I saw on TV an investor flipping houses and he did really well. And he had two things. He had a Hummer and he had a helicopter. And so my first reaction was, I need a helicopter and a Hummer.
Yeah.
So let me go get the Hummer first. And I talked to my wife at the time about it, and she's like, no way, and very candid about this. There's no way you're going to buy this Hummer. You're not making any money doing what you're doing. And I can't believe that the Hummer is going to be the thing that turns it around. So in my mania, I really kind of heard her say, sure, go ahead and get it. Just don't let me know about it. And what I did is I took my Camry. I had a Toyota Camry, and I drove it down to the Hummer dealership. And instead of trading in the Camry, I bought the Hummer and kept the Camry. And then I immediately parked the Hummer behind the dealership. There was a grocery store. And I parked the Hummer in there, and I walked back to my Camry and drove my Camry home. Like nothing happened. And then in the morning to go do my real estate work, I would drive my Camry to the Hummer, parked at this grocery store, spend all day in the Hummer, pretending to be a real estate investor. And I would drive. And that went on for months.
Man.
Until she finally found out that I bought a Hummer months ago. And I've kept it from her.
Yeah, I think this all came out with how you would try to intercept the mail before it got to the house.
I would try to intercept
and then
the
invoice came. I almost fell off my chair laughing, and I'm not laughing at you. This, by the way, everybody, is an exact depiction of what sometimes a manic episode can look like. And I want to digress for a minute here. Bob, because my head went on a journey somewhere, that when I turned age 21, early part of my career, I became a branch manager at a large bank, one of the top 5 banks in Canada. It was my first role as a manager. And I fast tracked my career, as I told you, because I thought I was smart, but I was driven, and it was for the reasons much like you said, alcoholic father, having to prove myself. The rules were wrong. And they gave me this branch, and I won't divulge where and who, but the assistant manager was a young woman who had bipolar. Now, back then, there was this was in the early days when the internet just came together. And back then, they didn't give me any training. I didn't know what it was. And they had put this woman almost like out to pasture in this small branch, so that hoping that she would just go away and there were some bizarre things that I encountered, and I didn't know how to manage her. And yet I didn't really know anything about, when you say there's the decisions that you made, some of them weren't your own. We'll get into that more. And so it just reminded me, I went back, he took me back, 25 years, man. And I honor you for this story, because I was carrying the weight of some of that, some guilt, because eventually the bank had me move her out into something. And I felt again that, here I am changing somebody's career. And I felt guilty about it. Reading your book brought that back, and it gave me some peace that it wasn't me. So thank you. So the Hummer one, we know there's something about I'm just going to throw this out there. Bob went and bought $1,000 worth of stationery because he thought that would help his business. You want to hire him as a business consultant, because the first thing he's going to do is buy $1,000 worth of stationery and tell you to put in your house. Now let's get serious. We're heading to chapter 1920, around there in the book. We have a few minutes left in this episode 2, and Suicidal Thoughts, something came together, and then losing it all, including something about divorce. Just tell us more about what happened.
Yeah, it got to the point where I had just been so destructive. At one time, I needed to pay a contractor. I didn't have the money. So I went to one bank and wrote a check and cashed it, went to the other bank and wrote a bad check. And basically I was kiting, kiting, I think is what it's called. Yeah. And the branch manager, was about to call the police on me. And what they did is they took all my money, any money that I had, and any accounts that were tied to me, my wife's, my kids' savings, and sucked it all out. And so I was very destructive. And so eventually I get, kicked out of the house, and I'm getting divorced. And there's, I sign away everything in my mania, and I find myself in without anything. I really, at the time, I'd say I was a millionaire, and I went from being a millionaire to being really homeless within a matter of about 6 months.
Yeah, I get emotional with the story, but the good news is it gets better. There is another chapter, everybody, that's coming. That's going to be the rise. And I just want to say, as we wrap up this part of the episode, Bob, that I love the way you're being so open and honest about this, because it really gets people to understand what bipolar is. It takes us into that in a very different way. I want to share with you a personal story before we wrap up, that when I was working to do my TED Talk, as I mentioned to you, I had an accident, I had a brain injury, memory loss, and all sorts of cognitive issues. And I ended up going in to get a help from a speaking coach, because I couldn't deal with it. And at that moment in time, I had this armor on, and she was trying to break that armor. And she told me that for 2 years she was strapped to her home. She was there because she was misdiagnosed with bipolar. She wasn't diagnosed properly. And that cracked me wide open, and that led me to bringing out a story I had been keeping about stress and my father and all that. And that led me to, for the first time, having the courage to walk on stage and do a TED Talk and reveal that part of my life.
Wow.
As a business leader, it was something I feared, because people would look down on me for talking about that. And and that's why, the topic of bipolar really hit my heart, because I want to just tell you this, that while bipolar is not something I was diagnosed with, there's threads in your story, man, that, because I deal with generalized anxiety. I have depression. I've been dealing with a psychiatrist for that. I had my first suicidal thoughts in the last 2 years. That I was put on medication, and it's a cocktail of things you got to keep trying and trying and trying. And so there are threads in your story that all of us can relate to, whether we have anxiety or bipolar or stress. We don't have to be mentally ill to understand that this could be important, because it could be part of our lives.
Yes.
As I wrap this up and we let you go, just want to read this. Bob wrote this to me when I asked him if he'd consider being on the show. Everybody, he said, months after I lost everything, I found myself meeting with a psychiatrist, and he started a new journey. But prior to that, on one desperate day, you found yourself nearly dying from suicide. And there were those moments. Just tell us about that. Tell us about that. Put us back into that dark place.
Yeah, there was this point in time when I had no hope, and I call it infinite hopelessness, is the depression side of bipolar, and I just couldn't see a way out. I couldn't get out. I couldn't see a way out, and so I had a lot of suicidal ideation. I thought about it constantly, and I was in the process of attempting suicide twice. The one time that comes to mind was when I lived near a bus stop on a big hill, and it seemed apparent to me that the best way I could end things was to jump out in front of this bus as it came roaring down the hill. And I got to the bus stop that morning to do that. And in a split second, I just thought of one of my kids, and I just thought, I can't have him burying me. I just can't do it. But I had about 1 foot out on the road, and I was ready to end it all. It's just, you have so much pain in your mind. You have so much noise going on in your head that you just don't know how to stop it, Tom.
No, I understand, and thank you for sharing that. I won't get into my episode, but I hear you, that you get to a point where when you can't see the future, and one of my mentors is Tony Robbins. You had a thread of that in your book, which is another thread connected to my story.
Yeah.
And I remember Tony saying that people, if you're going to commit suicide, you're going to do it. You're not going to think about it. You're not going to stand on a bridge for 3 hours. You're going to do it. And there's people, he drew it on a board, Crazy 8. He said people live a life on this Crazy 8 where they're happy and they're not happy, but some go off the 8 and take their life. And I've been at some of his live events. I've done all his university programs where he would work with people in the audience, much like you experienced. And he would say, who in here today, and picture 3,000 people in the room, tried to commit suicide last night, or had suicidal thoughts in the last 24 hours, and people would stand up, and so it's a very important topic, everybody, to understand that suicidal thoughts, from what I've learned, is you can visualize taking your own life, but I didn't realize till I had a moment seeing my daughter hanging by a rope in her dorm room in university across country. That was one of my thoughts. And when I processed it with my psychiatrist, they told me, they said, suicidal thoughts are not just thoughts of you being harmed by yourself, but other people being harmed. I had no idea what, and yet that was all just things going on in my brain because things had changed. And so I want to acknowledge you for sharing that. I mean, I didn't drag it out of you for pity or anything, but man, I mean, we'll end the episode too on this, that, there you we're at the darkest space, wanting to take your own life. And you did do Unleash the Power Within, which was Tony's program. So we're going to take up on that in the next part.
Okay.
And And so what happens next? Everybody, I'm going to wrap up on this, that we're doing a 3-part series with amazing author and teacher Bob Krulish on living with bipolar. And this episode was called Manic Bob, the Dark Night of the Soul. Please make sure that you subscribe to the show. You find the YouTube premiere when it comes out. This is just live taping we're doing now to honor it. Watch the first, second episode. Episode 3, we're going to be calling Bipolar Bob. The hero rises and becomes the answer key. And so, Bob, thank you for being here today. Will you come back for episode 3?
My pleasure. Absolutely. Look forward to it.
All right, everybody. Thank you. Everybody live with passion, live with purpose, and live that life that you deserve and desire. Thank you. All right, Bob. Bob, stand by. We're still on live here. So you're doing great. I mean, I just want to encourage you that this is hard, being an hour diving deep. Everything's going good for you?
Yeah, it's great. Yeah,
okay.
I'm enjoying it. I hope I'm doing all right for you.
You're doing great. You're doing great. You're getting a D, but that's like an A+ now. I'm just kidding.
Just man, don't tell me I'm getting a D.
Hey, man. Like I said, if I didn't get 110%, I wasn't good enough for me either. So there's so much. When we get into episode 3, we got to talk about Tony Robbins, because there's this uncanny another thread in our stories.
Yes,
we got to talk about it. So, okay, so we're going to stand by. Okay, we're going to get this going again.
Okay.
So if you need a sip of water, whatever, just get ready.
Yeah, I will.
All right, if you're catching us live here, everybody, we are on live stream. We've been on for about an hour, including breaks. We're recording an epic 3-part mini-series, which will be produced in the near future with my guests. So we're getting ready for part 3. So stand by, Bob. I'm going to change the screen view here.
All right, part 3.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Well, thanks, Bob. All right, we're going to bring you back. If you're watching us, what Bob just reminded me is to change the scrolling banner at the bottom of the screen. This is also the things that happen in a studio that that the guests don't see. And so what you're catching today is actually live, the way it works, bloopers and all. So part 3, there we go. And okay, Bob, so you want to proof that? Part 3 of 3.
That looks it. There you go. Perfect.
All right, man. All right, man. So we're going to be going live, so just stand by, okay?
Okay, Tom.
In 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show. My name is Tom Dutta. I'm the Quiet Warrior, and I'm excited to be back for an epic series, Living with Bipolar, with my guest, Bob Krulish, who I'll be introducing in just a moment. Everybody, we're live streaming. That means we're live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Well, where do you find that? Well, you found us, but if you're looking to find it in the future, you'll find it on my Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube feeds. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. There should be a button at the bottom of this video when it's out, so that you will get the premiere that will release in the near future. And we finished last time with episode 2. And if you haven't seen episode 2 and 1, still dive in for episode 3, but you got to go back and watch those as well. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce my guest back in the studio with me, Mr. Bob Krulish. Bob, welcome back.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know I've built you up a bit on each of the shows. Again, I want to do it again just for purpose, for those who are just jumping in, that, Bob, during Bob's tenure at Nationwide Insurance and Safeco, he saw a doctor for stress and related symptoms. Does that sound like you? Most people through their careers, everybody at one point see a doctor for stress. And he was incorrectly diagnosed with depression. He was placed on medication that would ultimately cause him to ruin his life. Once Bob received the proper diagnosis of bipolar 1, he was able to slowly put his life back together and soon found the strength to share his struggles with others. And today he does a lot of things to help others, and we're going to get him to share that with us in a little bit. So Bob, let's get right back into the story. The last time we had the audience on here, it was called Manic Bob, Part 2, The Dark Night of the Soul. That was the painful journey. We're at the point of you talking about, again, losing everything you had, including divorce, and contemplating taking your own life. And I want to talk about Tony Robbins for a minute, because there's a thread in both our stories. Somewhere in all of this, between losing it all, Suicidal Thoughts, I saw Tony Robbins, and you went to one of his events. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it was March of 2009, I had been kind of kicked out of the house in January, and just trying to figure out how to live on my own, and whether or not I could even survive.
How old were
Uh,
you?
I was so I would have been um, 41.
Okay.
Oh, is that right? Uh, Sorry, 51. That was 11 years ago.
Yep.
And so I had seen Tony Robbins before in a small event, not one of his big events, and I've been a big fan forever, Tony's, and and I just reached out and said I got to do something to get myself out of this funk, or I'm going to die. And I called to buy the tickets and talked to a really nice lady there, and she really heard my pain. And she said, I'm not trying to upsell you or anything, but I think the best thing for you to do is to buy the tickets that are right behind where the celebrities sit, so that you really need to be involved in this program. And I did. And then I got there, and my thought was, this hotel I'm staying at this convention center, is high enough for me to jump off it today.
Wow.
And I went to the event telling the two people I'm sitting next to that that's how I felt. And they're like, oh my God, do not leave our side. And then Tony came out and did some things. And then he asked if anybody was depressed. And I raised my hand. And I don't know if he had heard about me from his staff before or not, but he immediately picked me from the audience. Like you say, there's like 4,000 people here. And he comes down to talk to me about why I'm depressed. And we had some funny things go on at the beginning of our exchange, and I just felt better, having talked to him. He really helped me think things through differently while I was there. And I became kind of like the story of the whole 3-day weekend, in that every time I smiled, they put me on the Jumbotron. and I got the nickname Big Balls Bob from Tony, because of something we had talked about prior to that. And every time I'd be on the Jumbotron, the crowd would go nuts, and Tony would be interrupted and go, "Is Big Balls Bob on the Jumbotron?" And the crowd would go, "Yeah, Big Balls Bob, he's smiling."
That's hilarious. Everybody, I just want to catch you up. So, Bob, hold your book up there for a moment. Everyone, if you can see that when screams become whispers, that's what we're talking about. But mostly behind that is this real story. Thanks, Bob, of living with bipolar 1. Now, I want to just backtrack a little bit. If you didn't see the last 2 episodes, by the way, go and see them. You have to fill in the blanks. Get the book. We want to do a review for your book, post it online, everybody. That's how we get Bob's work known. But this is a man who grew up in a home, and it was it was very toxic. His father was violent. He took the brunt of that. His mother was hurt by it, his siblings, and his dad walked out on him. And he experienced that blame all his life unconsciously. And he went through life trying to prove something, trying to find proof that he was loved, trying to find proof that he was good enough. It turns out they called you the answer key, and well, you were quite smart. I mean, very smart, and you would be able to ace exams and A pluses. You went into college and were on the student government and all these great things, fighter pilot training, and you were being groomed in your mind to be the next senator. But you tore it all down because you didn't feel worthy. You still were seeking something. But there was something else going on below the surface. And as we learned in the last episode, everybody, and at some point in the book, you'll see this, that Bob was diagnosed with depression and put on antidepressants. And something Bob told us in the last show just blew my mind, that if you're misdiagnosed and there's other mental health issues going on and put on antidepressants, you can become manic, not just for a day, but for as long as you're on them. Manic Bob appeared. We talked about that. And 3 years, Bob, you were manic. This Tony Robbins thing, see, I did the Unleash the Power. That's why I related to it. And I was sitting in the audience, I think by myself, and I had those moments. And then I went out and I did the firewalk. I still have on my vision board. And when we meet one day, I'll show you. I also have the little baggie with my ashes in it.
Oh, cool. I wish I'd thought of that.
Yeah. And it was in Simon Fraser University up here, which is one of our biggest universities, about 2,000 people. And it changed my life. And I'm not going to get into that because this is about you. But what was interesting is Tony helped me understand something deep about myself as well. But it was at that time that I really didn't look at mental illness. I wasn't at that stage where you are in my life where I understood those things about myself. And so you turned it around. I want to get back into the book. I wrote down here on my paper that after losing everything in your divorce, feeling that there was really nothing left for you, and still not understanding the truth about your mental illness,
Right.
Bishop, one of the bishops who was in your life, knocked at your door. You'd had 3 eviction notices. You were pretty much living with nothing, not able to pay your rent, and they rescued you. They sent you to somewhere to live, and to a doctor. And you said, "Today is the day I get proof that my actions weren't always my own." So tell us about that moment from the knock on the door. Where did you go? Where did they take you to live? And then tell us about the doctor.
Yeah. So at the time, I had an apartment. I had just gone, saw Tony. I was as manic as I've ever been, and but one of the things that I learned was that the antidepressant may not be helping me as much as I thought it was. And so I took myself off the antidepressant, which I don't recommend anybody do. You need to really titrate or take it slowly when you come off an antidepressant. But I just went off of it, and I crashed. That manic episode that was being sustained by this antidepressant for 3 years came to a halt, and I crashed, and I was really depressed, and I was I was in my underwear. I hadn't showered or eaten in days, and I finally got to the point where I was shaking violently on my couch, and I called the bishop of my church, and he came out, and they got me some medication to calm me down. But still at that point, they did not know that I had bipolar disorder, nor that I had just swung into a depressive episode. Anyway, I don't work for a while. I had given away in my mania, I gave away more than $1 million to my ex-wife, and took really nothing. It lasted a few months, but then I was getting evicted from this apartment. And so I'd gone from millionaire to eviction in just a matter of months. And fortunately, the bishop knew a guy who knew a guy kind of thing, who had an old abandoned cabin on his property that had water and electricity, and let me stay there. But had I not had this cabin, I would have been on the streets.
Yeah, I just want to come back on and interject into that. Thank you for sharing that and honoring again your vulnerability to tell that part of the story. I mean, everybody, the humility of being able to know that you were once, in your underwear and had nothing, and at that low point, and you reached out for help. There was something in the book about faith in God, and
Yes.
Some will say that when you're at your lowest point, that's when we get past our denial and we reach out for help. And so they put you in this cabin. I had this flashback, this movie I saw called A Cabin in the Woods. So I just went there. I started visualizing this. We were watching a home rental show the other day called Hometown, and they were renovating this 100-year-old cabin. So the same day I'm reading your book about you in a cabin in the woods.
In the 100-year-old cabin, right?
It's amazing, man. So the doctor, so you did go to Dr. Palmer. I read that. Yes. And they diagnosed you. So let's get into this now. That's really the focus of this last chapter of the show. It's called Bipolar, Bob, and that's a positive. The hero rises and serves as the answer key. And I want to read you something I wrote down, Bob, because you just told us about it, about if you're on antidepressants. Bob taught us something there. If you're taking medication is for a reason. Work with your doctors, but take it. And if you decide to do something different, work with your doctors. I wrote this down here. The doctor said you were given prescriptions and a plan plus a warning. Yeah. This was a warning. Take your medication and you will be healthy again. Don't take it and you will end up in one of four places: homeless, hospital, jail, or dead. I've had patients in all four places. Oh my God. And this was going back to what Bob's taught us, Bob, and I'll give it back to you in a moment on this, that they misdiagnosed him. They didn't find that he had bipolar 1. They put him on antidepressants, and that made him manic for 3 years. Mm-hmm. The average layperson, Bob, wouldn't know that. They would just think there's something, this is just the way it goes. So they did properly diagnose you, and tell us about that journey. There was a lot of 60 different things, 60 different attempts to, just tell us about that and how you got through to your new normal.
Yeah, so I finally get to the doctor. I'll just real quickly say the reason most people with bipolar takes about 7 years to get properly diagnosed after being symptomatic. Wow. and about 3 to 5 doctors. That's the average. And the reason is that we don't go see the doctor when we're manic. We only go see the doctor when we're depressed. So they think we have depression. When we're manic, we think we're smarter than anybody on the planet. And so why would I go see a doctor when he's not as smart as I am? So we don't go see a doctor when we're manic. And so they don't get to see the mania, which would then lead them to diagnose you with bipolar disorder. So for a lot of doctors, they miss this because we don't present the mania when we go see them.
Yeah.
And so I left with 4 prescriptions. He said, let's hope they work. I said, let's hope you're a real doctor. Because I don't know what you mean by let's hope. But then I started to realize that it's quite a journey. And it took me over the past 11 years, I've been on 64 different. I just went on number 65 yesterday.
Yeah.
65 med changes, different cocktails for my illness. And I've been through 700 hours of therapy. And I have a high awareness of the illness now, and I'm highly intelligent about the illness. And it's helped me to be able to be stable and productive and really well for quite a long time now.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Bob, I just want to congratulate you. And for those, you have to see all 3 of the episodes, find the other 2. But in talking to you, if this wasn't scrolling on the screen, I wouldn't know you had bipolar. And so this is a testament to you, Bob, that congratulations on where you have come, man. I'm proud of you. And you're a blessing. It blew my mind, everybody. The teaching moment Bob told us takes, how many years to get properly diagnosed?
About 7 years.
7 years and 5 doctors, because they don't always look for the right thing. I want to just make a comment there, because my brain went here, that you also, a lot of your work is about teaching, in the book is about teaching others who care for people or around people. Yes. And this is a part that I experienced when I started seeing a psychiatrist because of my own depressive episodes since my injury, that it's me and him. And there's a couple online questionnaires I fill out focused on anxiety and depression, nothing else.
Right.
But if somebody was in that room talking about what they saw, the manic or the mania, or the other side of it, maybe that would help. Maybe that would give a bigger picture. because I got to be honest with you, sometimes when I talk to my doctor, I don't want to talk about that side of it. There's some
Right.
shame and there's some guilt. So you've given us a lot to think about on that. The something great happened as well through this whole journey about your children. So tell us about that, because I know that's a high point.
Well, I was really struggling with my children. They had really got the blunt of the bipolar. I was put on a terrible parenting plan where I only saw my youngest child for 3 hours twice a month. All those visits were supervised, and that lasted for 6 years. So I do have a couple of children that I don't have the best relationship with, and I have two that I do. What I did realize was that the medication gave me a better relationship with my kids. And so I call my medication my kid meds. I don't call them an antipsychotic or antidepressants. These are my kid meds. And that's part of what I do in my coaching program.
Yes.
We talk about how to identify the meds in a different way.
That's pretty amazing. Now, I want to know, is there an easy way to just, if somebody said you're in an elevator, tell me what bipolar is? Is it hereditary? Your father had it. I didn't know that until you told me. Is there an easy, quick way to get somebody to visualize what it is?
Yeah, first of all, it is hereditary. So you have to have the gene.
I see.
And then somehow that gene has to be turned on. When my dad left, that really turned on that gene for me. And so that, and really to summarize bipolar, it's a very expansive mood, the mania. It's really characterized by the mania, although the depression happens about 8 times more often than the mania.
Yeah.
The mania is really your thing that highlights it the most. And it's this expansive mood. It's people that are very impulsive, people who spend every dollar they have and then some.
Yeah.
It's people who have what's called pressured speech. They talk and talk and talk, and they talk fast, and then they have this flight of ideas. So if you're in an elevator and you're talking to somebody who's changed the subject on you about 19 times in that elevator ride, you may be talking to somebody with bipolar.
What percentage of the population, do you have any sense on that, may have bipolar diagnosed?
Yeah, they say about 2%. Although I've also heard the number be about 6 million people that are diagnosed.
What about undiagnosed? Do you have a sense?
I don't have a sense for that, but what's my work I do in coaching is I work with parents who have a child who seemingly is in denial.
Yeah.
And what's the problem? And they're undiagnosed or they're not being treated. And there's a different medical condition that these people have that prevent them from being able to understand they have the illness. So untreated bipolar and schizophrenia, I think, amounts to about 6 million people.
I see. Very fascinating. And thank you for sharing that. We're so educated now, and it's just the tip of the iceberg. So, we want to celebrate as we move to wrap up on the last part of your story here, everyone, for Bob, that I love how you are now a beacon of light. You're teaching people that, and you're owning the title Bipolar Bob, and that you live with bipolar. I love that. There's no shame. There's no stigma. I love it, man. So there's a lot of good you're doing. So rather than me read it off my paper, you have certified yourself. You're doing some teaching. You're creating some things. Just tell us about all that.
Yeah. So I'm certified on several different programs to teach nationally. And one program called LEAP that I do quite a bit of work with. I do workshops almost every weekend, almost every Saturday. I do a 3-hour workshop on how to communicate with your son or daughter or loved one that has a serious mental illness like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar with psychotic features and the like, and how to communicate with somebody who's in denial, who really can't understand that they have this illness and they have another illness on top of their mental illness that prevents them from being able to understand that they're sick. So we need to communicate with that person an entirely different way than we would communicate with somebody who has awareness of their illness. So my coaching program is all about how do you communicate with your loved one in a way that they would appreciate, first of all, what you had to say about their illness, and secondly, what that would lead them to take medication for an illness that they really don't believe they have.
Yeah, that's amazing. Can I ask you, if it's not comfortable to answer, but do you have somebody in your life now? Are you're in a relationship?
I am. Yeah, I've been in a relationship with somebody I'm very in love with for the past quite a while now, and we live
Fantastic.
together. And she's just amazing. I mean, amazing how she appreciates my illness and appreciates all the hard work that I put into it, and just really lucky. I mean, most people with bipolar disorder really struggle with having any relationship at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, and so to that person, I honor them, and thanks for sharing it. It's another indication that you can live with bipolar disorder. Everybody, you can live a good life. When I went to my cognitive behavioral therapy through my concussion, it was a room of 14 people, Bob, and they all had various mental illnesses. It's when I first woke up and realized that, wow, my life's not that bad. And I just remember at the end, I said something, and then the instructor, who was a doctor, corrected me and said, no, you don't get rid of mental illness. You manage it, and you can live a comfortable life with it. The key word is managing it. And I agree with you. The stigma, I think you've educated me a lot here, Bob, that when somebody says or is known to have bipolar, sometimes people just want to stay away because they're
Right.
afraid, they don't understand what it is. You've just given us so much. So everyone, Bob's book, hold it up one more time there, Bob.
Sure.
All right, When Screams Become Whispers by Bob Krulish. Everybody, I'd like you to get this book, and thanks, Bob. Give it a rating. Post it on Amazon so we can get Bob's work known. That's how authors get known. Post it on goodreads.com. We'll put that in the show notes. Bob is doing a lot to serve the world. Bob, where can people get a hold of you? I know you have a website and book you for whatever speaking help.
Yeah, they could go to bobkrulish.com. So just bobkrulish.com and find out all about that.
That's
And they can also get a free chapter to the book. And I also offer a free consult call for anybody who'd like to talk to me directly.
Well, that's fantastic. And everything is in confidentiality.
Absolutely.
So I know it would be a safe place. Well, everybody, it's been incredible. Bob, we've done so much with you. We've done 3 episodes now, the full story, and there's so much more that we didn't cover. And so I want to just thank you, and it's an honor to learn from you. And congratulations on your life.
Well, thank you very much. And it's an honor to be on your show, Tom. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hey, everybody, find this show on your favorite podcast channel. It will be released in the future once we edit it. Also, look for the YouTube premiere videos. There'll be 3 of them coming out on the Tom Dutta YouTube channel. And find your true passion like Bob has, and live with that purpose to make a difference in someone's life. Live the life that you deserve and desire. Thank you. All right, stand by, Bob.
Okay, Tom.
Okay, I'm ending the broadcast.